On Easter Island is an amazing place, and Easter Island is a triangle of three volcanoes with another volcano sort of in the middle, and that volcano is the quarry. And there's hundreds of these statues that are there in the quarry. Many of them are buried. They've been quarried, moved only maybe a few hundred yards. They're sitting there on Easter Island. The quarry is here, but what they did later was they moved some of the statues around the edge of the island. And so they would move them from the quarry to these areas. And the statues that were moved from the quarry to the shore, they all faced inland. And the Easter Islanders early on said, they said that, yeah, there was a power in their eyes called mana, and that the eyes of the statues protected the island and kept it from sinking. That's what they said, because the Easter Islanders said, we're from this lost land called Hiva that's out in the Pacific, like the lost continent of Mu or something, and that's gone. It's under the water, but Easter Island is still above the water, but we need these statues to protect the island, keep us from sinking. So back at the quarry, these statues are leaning over. They have the big long ears, by the way, which is something you see in India and Southeast Asia. Buddha and Shiva, they always have very long earlobes. That's what we have on Easter Island. You also have them inside the crater. I mean, it's quite strange. And some of the statues are gigantically huge. They're massive. And exactly why they would build all these statues, how they would move them around. And this is what people didn't get. They're buried in some cases. Up to 40 feet of dirt and detritus is burying these statues. So, but mainstream archaeologists are saying, they're only 400 or 500 years old, 600 years old or something. But how would that much soil build up around these statues? I mean, they weren't purposely buried, we don't think. I mean, that is really something, how huge these statues are. And it would show that they're really, really old. And it shows, too, that some kind of cataclysm hit the island and just wiped it out, buried a lot of these statues. Then later, other people came. So you can see how huge these things are and all the dirt around them. It's baffling. This is in the museum there. The statues that came alive, they thought the statues were alive. They had this inlaid like whale ivory and obsidian in their eyes, a power called mana, which is a Sanskrit word too, an energy, an occult energy came out of the eyes and protected the island. This is also in the museum there at Easter Island. This is the only statue of a woman, apparently. She has breasts, but very strange statue with this elongated head. I mean, it looks like an alien. This is a unique statue there, very strange. There's also another unique statue that was found in 1960. It wasn't put on display until really just about 10 or 12 years ago. And it's something of an alien-looking statue. It doesn't have an elongated head. Looks kind of like a gray alien. This, too, is a very unusual, unique statue there. Also on Easter Island is this place called Vinapu. It has the perfectly cut stones, cut by power tools, just like the walls in Peru and Bolivia and elsewhere. So once again, we're seeing the perfect megalithic type construction there. Perfect corners, little small key kind of stones to lock them all in. So when you see that and you're familiar with the work in Peru, you see it's identical. Thor Heyerdahl, the famous Norwegian archaeologist explorer, he discovered this statue, which is kneeling. And this is a unique statue too on the island. He's kneeling. He's not standing up. And this is what's known as a quizuo posture. It's a special kneeling posture. So when you're kneeling and you're on your knees and usually you put your hands on your thighs, just like this statue. That's that's known as Quizuo. And that too is seen around the world, this posture. It's basically, here's an Egyptian statue in the Quizuo position. It's a supplicant posture. You're in front of the king, and you're on your knees, and oftentimes you put your head forward, and if the king or the queen likes you, they knight you by putting a sword on your shoulder or something, and if they don't like you, they cut your head off, you know. So that's the Quizuo posture. So we see it on Easter Island, we see it in China, we see it in Tiwanaku. These were statues at Tiwanaku. They're in the Quizuo posture, on their knees with the hands there. Here's an Olmec statue in Mexico. He's in the Quizuo posture too. This is from the Indus Valley culture today in Pakistan and Western India. He's in the Quizuo posture. This is a special kind of a posture. Also on Easter Island, there's a type of writing there called rongo writing. And that writing features people, stick figures with their hands and their legs, and also even their hands and figures are in certain positions, much like sailors use flags and stuff like that on ships. And that same writing is found in the Indus Valley in ancient India. And it's also very similar to Shang dynasty glyphs too from ancient China. This is the rongo tablet. So mainstream archaeologists again are saying, oh, the Easter Islanders they just invented their own language, their own script, which in South America they supposedly never did. And what they say is that it's written in what's called Bostophedan pattern or as the oxbloud. So you read one line left to right, and then the next line, right to left to right, right to left. Certain languages were written this way, left to right to left. Doric Greek was written that way. Hittite languages were written that way. We can't read rongo writing or the Indus Valley script. We don't know what any of this says. Another island that's really the eighth wonder of the world is an island in Micronesia called Ponape. And on Ponape is this massive city called Nan Madol. Nan Madol is 100 artificial islands. Walls are 30 to 40 feet high. It's built out of basalt. Archaeologists estimate that there's 250 million tons of basalt in this city. It's built into the ocean. According to the islanders, the stones flew through the air from the other side of the island. And this is what they say. And they say two brothers came who had flying dragons. They flew all this basalt material across the island and stacked it up into walls. 100 artificial islands. And much of it's underwater even. I mean, let me say that again. 250 million tons of basalt are in the city. Entire mountains would be dismantled to get all the material. They don't know where it came from. It's that baffling. You have underwater ruins. You've got there's literally millions of tons of basalt underwater, and then you have these artificial walls up above. This thing is the eighth wonder of the world. But again, mainstream archaeologists are saying, oh, the islanders just built it 1,000 years ago. They put these giant basalt logs onto their canoes, floated them there. And the islanders are saying, oh, no, we didn't do that. No, they flew through the air. You know, it was magic. And the archaeologists are, oh, no, that's not what you did. This is one of the volcanic plugs that is on the other side of the island. And it still exists. It's where some of the basalt could have come from. And they call this Chicken Shit Mountain, actually. But the whole thing is that entire mountains like this would have been dismantled to create all of this material. So who's doing it? The coneheads, right? And I know that Brian was telling me too that how they've just gone some DNA a result on some of these Paracas skulls. I first got there in 1984 and started seeing these skulls. I was like, wow, this is something. And some of these skulls too, I mean, they're twice as long as a normal human skull. They're found at Tiwanaku. Some of these guys look pretty weird. And these elongated skulls. In Paracas and other areas along the coast of Peru, it's extremely dry. So skeletal material lasts for a long time. We have x-rays. I've been there with Brian too a couple of times. This is an unusual skull that Brian actually showed me. And we know that ancient people did do this head binding. And in fact, they did it up in Montana at Flathead Lake. Flathead Lake in Montana is called Flathead Lake because the Flathead Indians live there. And the Flathead Indians were called the Flathead Indians because they did this too. They smashed these skulls, they made cone heads. The Chinook Indians in Seattle did that too. We have the Olmecs, the Mayans did it. This is an unusual skull because normally you're going to have the plates in your head. As you become older, they are loose when you're younger, but eventually they fuse as you become an adult. But this skull doesn't have the fusing of the plates of the head. So here we have a cone head without the fusing of the plates, and that might indicate that this is not a human skull, not a normal human skull, and that this would be of the Anunnaki, and the idea there is that some people, some ancient races, apparently naturally had these elongated heads. The Anunnaki, other people, perhaps some Egyptians, but we know that other people imitated this right up until modern times. On the island of Vanuatu and the Kurds and other people, they were still doing this. Akhenaten and Nefertiti, the Egyptians were doing it too. This is Meritaten, one of the daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and she's a conehead too, with this elongated skull. Tutankhamun, you don't hear this about him much, but he's a conehead as well, and he has an elongated skull too. So here's one of the Sumerian Ubaid statues. They have elongated heads. We really only know them really from the statues and figurines, and much the same with the Olmecs as well. And they have what they call the coffee bean eyes. That's what archaeologists call this, coffee bean eyes. So they have the cone heads. In theory, these are depictions of the Anunnaki kind of people from Sumeria. But again, we find these cone heads and elongated heads literally all over the world. And even on Pacific Islands and things. With Sumerian cylinder seals and stuff like that, we have pictures of gods and Sumerians on a flying disc here, as they're depicted, and they're worshiping and whatnot. Here's another Sumerian seal, one of the winged angels, kind of birdman, angel things. The whole idea of angels and gods having wings, we find that in Sumeria a lot. And the Sumerian gods, the Anunnaki, these are gods. You know them from the conical hats they're wearing that have these little spikes. And that indicates that they're one of the gods, the Anunnaki. And you would think they have these cone heads and stuff. All right, let's jump forward now to a little bit of UFO activity. Part of the whole thing with UFOs and craft, these elongated craft, they're not just spaceships and aircraft, they're submarines too. They can fly into space, they can go to the moon, and they're submarines. They can come out of the water. These, what you're going to see now, are photos from March of 1971. They were taken by the USS submarine called the Trepang in the North Atlantic. It's up near Iceland and Greenland. And these photos were leaked only about 6 years ago to a French magazine in Paris, and they were published. So somebody who was on that submarine or in the US military leaked these photos to this French magazine. And probably most of you are going to be seeing them for the first time. So it was a submarine with a periscope and stuff, was taking these photos through the periscope. So the first thing that was happening was this craft is coming up out of the water. Then it comes up out of the water. You can see it here. It's the second photo. Water's coming off of it, and it's coming up. Here it is. Now it's out of the water, and it's leveling out over the ocean. The submarine's taking the photos. It's still got water coming off it and almost like steam and stuff like that. Here's another photo. It apparently had lights along the side. This thing is huge. It looks like one of the classic cigar-shaped kind of craft. Here it would be now leveled out. All the water's gone from it. It's just hovering over the ocean right now. Here's really what is apparently the last of the photos of that craft, a huge sort of mothership submarine type craft. It looks a lot like a submarine, but this is actually a submarine and a spaceship. Right after this huge cigar-shaped shift came out of the water, a second craft then came out after it. And it was a smaller craft that was something of a saucer-shaped or triangular-shaped craft. And here's the last picture of it. So apparently there were two craft coming up out of the water in 1971. So this was taken in the North Atlantic. But these are pretty astonishing photos, and in my mind, completely authentic. So we're not sure what we're looking at. We're looking at UFOs and USOs, unidentified submersible objects. So this is all pretty unusual, to say the least. Here's another, this is quite recent, May of 2016. And this is right over Dayton, Ohio, which is where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is. And they looked up in the sky, it's broad daylight, and here's this weird kind of arrow-type craft just hovering in the sky. It's like on in the afternoon. So this is a picture of it. And it was just hovering there, and then it finally just moved up into a cloud and then was gone. So unusual kind of thing, and it's strange that it's also near basically an Air Force base where that was happening. This is what's called a Baltic Sea anomaly, and it was this craft that was found on the bottom of the Baltic Sea up near Sweden and Finland and whatnot. And here's an image of it, what it looks like. And what's interesting about this thing, it looks like the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. So how about that? And we all love Star Wars. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about Nikola Tesla here. How am I doing? Okay, all right. So Tesla, one of my heroes. We all hear about how Otis invented the elevator. Yes, I've got my Tesla shirt on. Yay. Tesla is really a suppressed scientist. I grew up, I was a good student and interested in science, but I did not learn about Nikola Tesla. I learned that Otis invented the elevator, and I learned about Edison and all that kind of stuff. But you don't really learn about Tesla much unless you become an electrical engineer. Although Tesla now, fortunately, has become popular, as he should be. But ultimately, he was, after World War II, knowledge of him, he was suppressed. He was even airbrushed out of photos. Group photos with Einstein and other scientists, they literally airbrushed Tesla out in some, just because they didn't want people to know about Tesla that much. Because Tesla invented things 100 years ago that are still science fiction today. Tesla died during World War II, by the way. Here's Tesla's laboratory around 1900. There's Mark Twain, and Tesla's in the background at Tesla's laboratory. Tesla invented the electricity that we use today, alternating current. It's what's lighting this hotel, it's what's lighting the whole world. A lot of people don't understand that alternating current, AC electricity, is created by rotating magnetic fields. That's what's creating all this power. And you have a small Tesla three-phase engine in your car, your alternator, that's creating power and stuff like that. So that's how simple and genius the three-phase power is that we have today. And Tesla was a visionary. He envisioned these inventions in the sky. A lot of people think that Tesla was a reincarnated Atlantean engineer or something, and he was just bringing this ancient technology, and it's a simple technology, alternating current and power. Extraterrestrials must have it. They probably had it in Atlantis. So the idea that power, electrical power as we know it, we've only had for 120 years or so. But that's, the same power, the Egyptians had it, ancient people had it, the Atlanteans had it. Marconi is another person. I'd like to mention him just briefly. He was Tesla's student. He was a genius as well. A lot of people who are big fans of Tesla don't like Marconi because they think that Marconi stole some of Tesla's ideas, including the radio. And Marconi is sometimes credited with inventing the radio, but it really was Tesla. And now Tesla gets that credit really now. Marconi was a genius. And the difference between Tesla and Marconi was Tesla was a social misfit. He was a terrible businessman. He couldn't run a business. He just didn't understand money and things like that. He was very much a loner. He never got married or dated. He had a lot of phobias. I mean, he was kind of a strange guy. Marconi was quite different. Marconi was a good businessman. He was a very socially adept person. He became a multi-millionaire. He developed big companies. Some people believe that Marconi faked his death in 1937 and moved with 100 scientists from Europe right before World War II and moved to South America and created a secret city there, like a James Bond Moonraker type city. And in fact, the James Bond movie, Moonraker, is mimicking this secret city that Marconi supposedly developed. So here's our other great genius, Albert Einstein. After the theory of relativity, also around the same time, the 20s, Einstein proposed the unified field. The unified field was the field that gravity and magnetism and electricity and what they also call the weak force, according to Einstein, all of these forces emanated from the unified field. That's what Einstein thought. And Einstein was supposed to write a big paper and a big equation. And the idea is that there are equations for electromagnetism. But with the unified field, you would have an equation for electrogravity and magnetogravity. And all these things are manifesting from the unified field. And this is gravity control, gravity, anti-gravity, all that kind of stuff. And this is what you would need for in theory, your flying saucer. You're going to have plasmas. Mercury can be part of it. Gyros, they're electric. So that's part of the whole idea, really, with UFOs, flying saucers, and things like that. They're electric. They're not jets. They're not rockets. There's an electric power there that's powering them. You need power. You need electricity. Tesla also is the famous inventor of the death rays. And they're still a mystery, too. Back in the 20s and 30s, that was big talk, death rays and stuff like that. And one idea of Tesla's death ray was a scalar wave type weapon where these energy bottles and energy waves converge. Here they converge, and where these waves, energies converge, things are obliterated. And that's your death ray. It's only been recent that a different kind of death ray came out from Princeton, published a book just a couple of years ago about Tesla. And it was the first time that these diagrams, because Tesla never patented it, and this death ray was a plasma jet of mercury. So this death ray would spew out pellets, bursts of mercury that were electrified. And this would be like the ray guns on Star Wars, even in a sense, the lightsabers and things like that. So mercury is part of it. By the way, when you go to Area 51 near Las Vegas, if you drive out there, you can drive along the highway, and there's even a sign, the secret city. I mean, you need to have a classified pass to get in there. The name of it is Mercury. That's the name of the city in Area 51. So one of the things that Tesla was doing too were these towers. And the Wardenclyffe Tower, what Tesla wanted to do in the end was broadcast power, electricity, just like radio and TV. And what we have now is Wi-Fi sort of things too. Tesla patented this tower, and what it was going to do was it was going to broadcast power into the atmosphere. He went to Colorado Springs first to do his early experiments, where he built a tower that would then broadcast the power. And then he patented this device, this tower, and he began building it in Long Island. With Tesla, these towers would put out power into the atmosphere, and anti-gravity ships that were electric would draw power from these towers. These ships have no wings. They're anti-gravity, they're electric. And that was part of the whole idea with Tesla's power system. This is in the 1920s, that if you had a lamp, say, you would just put a lamp on a table, but you wouldn't need an outlet. You would just put it on a table, and then you could turn it on. And it would take power from the power that was being put in the atmosphere, just like television and radio and stuff like that. And so here again, in the 1920s, the magazines and TV and whatnot, they were all these old serials. They're using Tesla technology. They have these, Flash Gordon buzzing airships, all that kind of stuff. And they're drawing these they have these powerful searchlights and things like that on them. Very similar to modern day UFO stuff. Here's Tesla's tower down here. It's putting out these power. There's this battles is occurring. These airships that are also elongated type cigar-shaped ship. This is all what Tesla imagined. What stopped this was J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan was funding the building of these towers, and Tesla needed funding. This was part of the problem. He was a terrible businessman. He couldn't ever save any money for himself. He was constantly broke. But when J.P. Morgan discovered that Tesla was essentially giving free energy to the world, and that all he could do if he was funding this was be a lamp manufacturer, he didn't like that. And he was like, well, how can I make money off this? I can't meter this power. And he put the kibosh on it. He said, okay, that's it. We're not funding this anymore. And ultimately, the FBI came and tore that tower down. This was 1923. But Tesla was still famous of that time, and every year on his birthday, Tesla would give the reporters in New York would come to him and ask him about death rays and towers and new inventions and whatever. Tesla died in 1943 during World War II. So now, let's get back to Atlantis. According to a group out of San Diego, they started it in Chicago actually, and they were called the Lemurian Fellowship, and they claimed that in Atlantis were also these towers called the Maxt towers. And the Maxt towers were these crystal towers that were also broadcasting power into the atmosphere. This is what they said. And they published a couple of books. One was called A Dweller on Two Planets, and then a second book called An Earth Dweller Returns. And in those books, they talk about these towers. Well, there are crystal towers like this, and we call them obelisks. An obelisk is a monolithic granite tower. It has to be monolithic, one single solid piece of stone. And it's granite, and granite is infused with tiny quartz crystals. And there's different kinds of granite, and in fact, the way they categorize granite is through the crystal content and how big the quartz crystals are in the granite. The smaller the crystals, and it's a different kind of granite, the larger the crystals it is. The Egyptians most of their obelisks were Aswan granite, red granite, which is a really high crystal content granite. So here, with obelisks, are these same crystal towers, apparently, that the Lemurian Fellowship was talking about. Now, one of the things with obelisks is that Egyptologists have no explanation for them. They don't know why. Egyptians would quarry obelisks. Typical obelisk is about 500 tons. Just quarrying it and lifting it out of a quarry is tough enough, but to move it to someplace and to erect it, make it stand up, these are very difficult. This is the unfinished obelisk before it was uncovered, completely uncovered. This is in Aswan, so this is like 1880 or something like that. Here's the unfinished obelisk today. I was telling you earlier how they stopped construction on it and the quarrying because they found that it had a flaw underneath it, a crack, and it wasn't going to be perfect, so they couldn't use it. And this obelisk would have weighed about 1,000 tons. So it's an amazing, it's something. Here's my friend Christopher Dunn standing in the channel. He maintains, too, that they're using power tools and even heavy equipment to quarry it and cut it. And the whole idea, too, is that these, and I was there in Egypt with John Anthony West one time, and he had a tuning fork, and he was showing us how these obelisks are tuned, and they're cut, there's a certain, there's special antennas. And in fact, at the very least, obelisks are giant acupuncture needles for the earth, at the least. And Egyptologists have no explanation. They maintain that an obelisk is just symbolizes a ray of the sun. That's their explanation. There's very few books ever written on obelisks because Egyptologists don't know what to say. There's maybe 4 books ever written about obelisks, and I wrote one of them. Here's the Washington Monument being struck by lightning, just as a kind of an example. The Washington Monument is a faux obelisk. It's not a real obelisk because it's not monolithic. It's built with lots of different blocks. You can go inside it and all that. But it's interesting that the Masons, and even today, it symbolizes, the Washington Monument symbolizes the power of Washington, D.C. and of America and the military. So, but obelisks aren't just in Egypt, by the way. Obelisks are also in Ethiopia, in Aksum. Here's some of the obelisks in Aksum. They're mysterious too, they're megalithic. And in fact, the largest obelisk that was ever erected, they say, was not in Egypt, but it was in Ethiopia. And it's this one right here. It fell, it was so huge. As it fell, it crashed down on this other giant megalithic structure, destroyed it, broke into like 10 pieces, this huge obelisk in Aksum. And just pieces of this obelisk are massively huge, weighing hundreds of tons. It's really something. And this other structure that's this is part of the broken obelisk here, and it was something else. It wasn't an obelisk, but also giant blocks. And now the broken pieces of the obelisk on top of it. But even the Lonely Planet guidebook to Aksum was saying in it that the people in Aksum believe that underneath this rubble here is an anti-gravity machine that erected all the obelisks and even cut the stones. And today, and this was in Graham Hancock's great book, Sign and the Seal, where he's asking some of these priests in Aksum, he said, well, how did you guys raise these obelisks and make all this stuff? And the priest tells him, oh, the Ark of the Covenant did it. That's their explanation. Here's also megalithic tombs in Aksum, and you have the keystone cuts here too that we were looking at. Here's one of them. So here's one of those the same keystone cuts that we're seeing in Ollantaytambo in Peru, at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Bolivia, also in Vietnam, they're in Borobudur in Java. So we have the same stuff there in Ethiopia. And even in Ethiopia, they're cutting these monolithic doors where they take a solid piece of granite and then cut a door in it. You know, who does that? You see that also at Tiwanaku. And speaking of the Ark of the Covenant, this church, this small church here, Ethiopians believe the Ark of the Covenant is inside that church right today. And that it's protected by a priest who is, one priest is in there to guard it. No one can go in, not even the king of Ethiopia or the president. No one is allowed into that building except for this one priest. And before he dies, he selects another priest to take his place. So Ethiopians think the Ark of the Covenant is in there. Obelisks are also in Europe. These are the devil's arrows in Yorkshire, in England. And they're obelisks. There's like 4 of them. They're just near York. This is another obelisk that's called a Rudston monolith. It's an obelisk at a small church out in eastern Yorkshire near Scarborough. It's a small little church, but there's this obelisk that's standing there. There's part of it, they've put a little tin cover on it. And strangely, now during the 1970s, when Charles Berlitz wrote The Bermuda Triangle, which was a very popular book, I mean, after Eric Madawakan's Chariots of the Gods, The Bermuda Triangle by Charles Berlitz was probably the second best-selling book of that period, all those kind of books. Well, a number of other books came out around that time because Charles Berlitz's Bermuda Triangle book was so popular. So a couple of books came out about the Great Lakes Triangle and all the ships and planes that disappear around the Great Lakes. So Hugh Cochrane wrote this book about 1980. He's a Canadian. This is not a very well-known book in the United States. Most copies were published in Britain. So it was called Gateway to Oblivion, the Great Lakes Vortex. Now, one of the chapters in this book is talking about a place just in Canada on the northern part of Lake Ontario, near a place called Presqu'île Provincial Park, right here. So around the year 1800, as Cochrane is talking about this Île Presqu'île Park, what happened was, get this, people would row out a couple of 100 yards out into the lake, and the tip of an obelisk was coming up out of the lake. This is what Hugh Cochrane says. And the lake was clear, and they could look down, and they could see for a couple of 100 feet this obelisk in the water, standing there. And just the very tip of the obelisk was above the lake. And people, according to Hugh Cochrane, people on a nice day, summer day, they would row out to the tip of this obelisk, and they would tie their boats to the obelisk and have a little picnic and stuff, and then go back to shore and stuff. But what happened then was that there was a ship that was there. It was a big storm, and they were taking a prisoner who was a Native American prisoner who had murdered somebody, and they were bringing him from one place, and they were bringing him to this area. But a big storm came up, and the people on the shore, they knew that this ship was coming, that it was nighttime now, but it was a terrible, terrible storm. And the people on the shore then, they lit big bonfires to try and show the ship where the shore was and kind of act as just a primitive lighthouse. What happened was that ship apparently struck the obelisk and sank. All lives were lost. And after that, the obelisk was gone. So the obelisk is not there anymore after that storm and that ship hitting it. So after about 1805 or 1810, that obelisk was gone. So how about that? I mean, that's quite strange that there would be an obelisk there. There was supposedly an obelisk at Pumapunku as well, there in Bolivia. All right, now we're going to go to the moon. So let's go to the moon and the strange things on the moon. There are obelisks on the moon. They're called the Blair Cuspids. They were first found by American probes. This was about 1966. So they were going around the moon. And what they did was they took this photo, and Blair was an engineer who was working for Boeing. And he noticed, and then the Russians put this out, but they call them now cuspids, so the Blair cuspids. This is what they look like. They're apparently a bunch of obelisks that are on the moon. So how about that? So we have obelisks around the world, and now we have even obelisks on the moon, which is pretty strange. The moon itself some people think the moon is hollow. When the Apollo 11, when the command module actually, it crashed onto the moon, and NASA said that the moon rang like a bell for several minutes, and the idea that it was hollow. Some researchers say that there are certain craters on the moon that they can't find a bottom to, and that they're literally entrances into the hollow moon. In some ways, the moon, our moon, is like a Death Star or something from Star Wars. And some people think that our moon is artificial. Now, the Russians also had their programs, and the Russians, because of the Soviet official thing of atheism, and they were trying to suppress religions in the Soviet Union, and the Russians were very open to space visitors, UFOs, structures on the moon, very scientific about the whole thing. And so the Russian space program was quite different than the American space program. They would release unusual photos of the moon, including this one, this Zond 3 photo. And it's showing what is apparently a 20-mile-high tower on the moon. And here's another picture of it. And Mike Barra also put this in his book, Ancient Aliens on the Moon. So here we have also what are these giant towers on the moon, it would seem, like obelisks. There are also structures on the moon, too, that look like ziggurats and things like that. The idea is that NASA is familiar with that there are structures on the moon, but they don't want to talk about it. The Russians do. The Russians will talk about these things. Craft on the moon. Even there's other Apollo missions. The idea that we're already back on the moon and that we have bases on the moon, even possibly joint American-Russian bases on the moon. This is another, what appears to be some kind of obelisk or pyramid on the moon. And with like the Blair cuspids and things like that, it's these shadows. Looking at the shadows that come from these objects are part of what we can see. These are some other Russian photos of the moon. They apparently show also towers or what seem like Tesla-type objects and energy towers and things like that. And now let's go briefly to Mars, where also there's some strange stuff. Mars has two moons. One is called Phobos, the other is called Deimos. And they rotate in opposite directions around Mars. And they're quite small moons. Our moon is very, very large compared to these moons. And early on, it was suggested that the moons of Mars were artificial. And in fact, you have on Phobos, you have these weird striations and things like that. And there's a monolith on one of the moons, on Phobos. So here, as you can see from the shadow there, it's some tall obelisk kind of structure that's on Phobos. So this is what the computer, what they think it might be, but it's this giant, weird tower that's up there. And again, so we don't know exactly that. Here's the other moon of Mars, which is Deimos. And in fact, in 1989, the Russians, just right before as the Soviet Union was dissolving, and this Marina Popovich she was a Russian astronaut, and the Russians sent a probe to Mars called the Phobos probe. And the probe took this photo of Phobos as it approached Mars, and it appears to be what is this very large, elongated craft coming up to the moon here And so the Russian Phobos probe is taking a photo of the moon of Phobos. And here's this craft is coming up. Here's another one of the photos here. So the Russians eventually released these photos. She did. And then finally, the probe turned towards Mars, the actual planet Mars, and something was coming from the planet towards the probe, and it took this photo. It was like a shot or some energy or a craft or a missile, and it took this last photo, and then the Soviet Phobos probe went out, and that was it. And it was basically shot out of orbit. So on Mars, unusual mechanical parts and things on Mars. Here's what they call the D&M pyramid on Mars. Of course, you probably have all heard about the face on Mars. Supposedly the Sphinx on Mars with the pyramid in the background. Other what would appear to be structures on Mars. And this is what they call the Mars monolith. Also would seem to be something like an obelisk, or, and in many ways this is like the monolith that was in the movie and the book 2001, A Space Odyssey, where in that movie and the book, they go to the moon and they find a monolith like this, and then that monolith sends them on to Jupiter. So one last thing here, just to finish it all up, about our solar system. So back in the mid-1800s, there was a German mathematician named Bode, and he created what's called Bode's law. Bode's law is a logarithmic mathematical formula that as you go out from the sun, you're going to have planets, Mercury, and then Venus, and then Earth, and then Mars. And in Bode's law, between Mars and Jupiter, there was another planet in Bode's law, and then you would have Saturn and other giants. Well, what astronomers found was that Bode's law fit our solar system almost perfectly, except for the asteroid belt. And essentially, what Bode was saying, there should be a planet here. But there's not a planet. There's all these rocks in space instead. And so what the asteroid belt is apparently is an exploded planet. There should be a planet there, but that planet exploded, and we have all these rocks in space. This is the largest body in the asteroid belt. It's called Ceres, and it has this weird bright spot on it. And NASA can't really figure this out. I mean, it's almost like it's being lit from inside or something like that. How about that? So that's part of the whole thing of the idea of the asteroid belt. But now we get to Saturn and the Saturn satellites and the ring structure and this moon of Iapetus of Saturn. Just go through it. It has this kind of navel. It looks like it's an artificial kind of thing. And it has this seam that's running along it right here. So we have this seam. It's quite unusual. And yeah, other people have pointed this out, how this ridge goes through. It's almost like it's an artificial moon. And the idea is that our moon is artificial too. NASA once said that our moon is older than the Earth. And they surmised that somehow our moon and some of these other moons that were brought here from other solar systems. How about that? So there's a lot of mysteries out in the universe and a lot to discover. So keep watching Ancient Aliens. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you.